if we take the premise that regardless of where you live, if you're an American citizen, that you should get the same level of care as any other American citizen, and we look at the obvious inequalities of distribution of care throughout the country, and then you layer on top of that the complexity and expense of immuno-oncology, this is its own crisis flashpoint. So with immuno-oncology, I'm actually a practicing immuno-oncologist. That's what I did my research in, and this is what I do every day. And so I see things I've never seen before. I've seen young people with metastatic melanoma, with brain metastasis, have complete responses, and they're now 5, 7 years out, they're seemingly cured. And it's hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars to do that. It's very complicated to give these drugs, and the side effect profile of these drugs, if you don't manage them right, they can be deadly. And so you have this incredible, not incremental benefit, but profoundly change of care benefit. And now we have safety net hospitals that are struggling, and you layer on top of that alternative payment models. So it sounds like you're putting everything in a blender and hitting spin, right? So, you know, how do you see from your perspective all of this tying out?
Yeah, so in the short run, a lot of the critical access hospitals, rural health clinics, federally qualified health centers have been exempt from participation in models such as the OCM. So with all of this innovation happening, they're exempt from jumping in, and their path will kind of take over time. In terms of immuno-oncology and combination immunotherapy, agree the promise and what we've seen with patients has been fantastic. And I think that's the point to key in on, in that it's delivering for certain patients tremendous outcomes. And so there's certainly an appetite among various stakeholders to move towards some outcomes-based drug pricing. And in that lens, it then becomes quite feasible in terms of delivering tremendous outcomes for these particular patients. The challenge becomes how to measure that in the real world. You can do clinical trials and cohort analyses and then say, for this set of patients, this is the cost. But to really efficiently and accurately do that at scale, leveraging real-world data to say, the patient that Dr. Pecora treated now is living 40 years longer, there's a price for that, versus the other patient Dr. Pecora treated that passed away a week later. So there's an opportunity to look at different payment models in that regard. And I think bringing it back to the patient will be key there in terms of the outcomes the drug's actually delivering.
So I agree with Brendan, and I think the question is who takes risks for those type of treatments? My view is that physicians shouldn't be on the hook either way for patient benefit or patient costs associated with really new things, including the PD-1 inhibitors. But instead, really it's pharmaceutical companies that should be holding some of this risk. And so moving towards paying for outcomes where it's pharma that's providing drugs and some combination of insurers plus providers that are providing data on real-world outcomes, which is going to flow back to pharma in terms of payment and potentially to providers in some way in terms of some other other payment, is where we're going to go. Those drugs are actually a great example where, frankly, we don't really know which patients are going to respond perfectly to those treatments, and it's entirely possible that we're going to have to layer one drug on top of another drug in order to get durable responsivity. And so in that case, it's going to be very, very difficult for physicians and or patients to be holding that risk. Someone else has to be holding the risk for that treatment, and it's likely going to be some combination of the payers, the insurers, plus pharma.
Yeah, that's interesting. I agree. I mean, in our personal experience, we are now at the table with big data, precision analytics, payers, pharma, and we're all figuring this out together. So I think that's going to be as transformative as anything we've talked about.
Yes.
And that the pharmaceutical industry and the biotechnology industry is going to understand the risks they're taking is not just the risk of discovery and approval, it's also the risk of efficacy in the real world setting.